Reasonably practicable. What a nonsense term, don't you reckon? It really
Yeah.
sounds like some sort of nonsense factory, probably the same one that created social distancing came up with the term reasonably practicable. Can you just imagine the episode of Utopia where some sort of committee or focus group was sitting around trying to debate, are we going to do this? Are we going to do that? That's what I think of with reasonably practicable.
Who are we supposed to be engaging with?
Our stakeholders.
What does that mean, though?
What do you think it means? And it's confusing, but it's really important to understand it because in Australia, reasonably practicable is built all the way through our WHS legislation, our laws, the WHS Act and regulation. And it does confuse employers and it confuses employees as well. However, it is something that is hard to explain at times. It's hard to explain what reasonably practicable means without using the word reasonable.
Okay, let's pull apart these two terms. So first, reasonably or reasonable. Let's talk about this for a second, don't you reckon, Bron? So look, this
What's reasonable to you is not reasonable to me. So that's why it's so contentious.
Oh, it is. Don't you reckon it's like the legislators again? They put into Google vaguest and most subjective adjective possible, and poof, out popped reasonably. But look, again, the basis of it comes from 19th century tort law. Okay, this concept of reasonability dates back to an 1837 tort case involving someone called Menlove and someone else whose name doesn't really matter. But the idea behind this tort case is, or I guess even what a tort is, which will run along the bottom here, is that it's a legal wrong committed by one entity or one person against another, and the resolution of which is usually in the form of compensation. And so that's where this concept of the reasonability or the reasonable person test comes from, hence in reasonably practicable, reasonably.
Yeah. And then we have practicable. So it's not practical or it's not sensible or possible, it's practicable. And that usually relates to something that can be done or accomplished or can be implemented. So in that context, it makes sense. It's another word that's come from sort of Old England, and it also forms part of work health and safety law in the UK. But it's not an absolute term, and that's what makes it confusing.
Absolutely. Okay, so now you understand the two terms, reasonably and practicable. You put them together and it's as clear as mud, isn't it, Brian?
Absolutely. But look, at its core, reasonably practicable means taking key steps, achievable steps that you can take in the workplace that will ensure health and safety of workers or those that might be impacted by your work. So some of these achievable steps could be quite simple things, and they could be things you're already doing.
Okay, so we'll take you through some of the real world practical application processes attached to reasonably practicable.
So number one, risk assessment. So it's reasonably practicable for you to complete a risk assessment on the task or whatever it is that you need to assess or manage, to identify the threats, the hazards, identify the risks, and then do something about it. That's quite reasonable for you to do that and very practicable for you to implement in the workplace. Number two, stay informed. So that's really easy. Stay informed about what's going on in your industry, what's happening in your local geography, what's happening in terms of trends and issues. So stay on top of what's happening. It is reasonably practicable that you could read about things and stay informed. Now, number three is records and documentation. Again, if you are doing a risk assessment or you're undertaking some tasks, document them, keep your records. That is a reasonably practicable thing for you and your organisation to do, is keep your records.
Yeah. Number four, and we think it's a pretty critical one, is learning from others. So like, it's a little bit like, look, and this isn't formal legal advice, I guess we should mention
We're not
that.
lawyers.
Yeah, when in doubt, look around you and look at what your industry peers and competitors are doing and make sure you meet that standard, if not exceed that standard. So you certainly can't go below that standard that your peers or your competitors are at. And that is a critical one because that helps you, I guess, dissolve all the noise or the white noise around reasonably practicable. And then last but not least is really genuine communication, consultation and engagement with your workforce. And look, there's all sorts of techniques we could talk about here in terms of humble inquiry and others, but really genuine, meaningful interaction with the people that are doing the jobs that you're expecting them to do safely. That is so important to being able to demonstrate reasonably practicable in relation to eliminating or mitigating WHS risk.
Yeah. So there's 5 key things that we've given you that are easy and achievable for you to implement in the workplace to meet that reasonably practicable test. So,
that's right.
But look, a good example, it would be reasonably practicable for you to access a code of practice on whatever it is that the topic that you're looking at. If it's working at heights, get the code of practice. Codes of practice are issued by all safety regulators. They're online and they're free, and they're a really great source of information. So there's no barrier to you getting that information. So it is reasonably practicable to access a code of practice, to understand your requirements. So look, at its core, reasonably practicable means being able to take reasonable and achievable steps to achieve workplace health and safety at work and also in your remote location. So anything that you do, you're taking steps to ensure work health and safety is in place at work.
Yeah, and even extending to those others, whether they be visitors or members of the public that are affected by your workplace activities. But also bear in mind as well that, look, while regulators will tell you that reasonably practicable is an objective test, our experience is the reality is far from that, and you're better off understanding that it is a flexible and context-specific term that will vary depending on the circumstances and depending on the, I guess, size, shape, resources of the organisation. So I guess our advice to you, or best advice, is that you need to remain constantly vigilant and really focus on continuous improvement and those 5 steps that we've suggested.
Yeah. And look, just keep it real. I hate to use that
reasonable
term, but reasonable, yeah. But do everything you can to make sure that you're monitoring health and safety at work.
That's right.